Alright, welcome back. Out riding the Supersix on some very steep gradients. I don't know if you can hear that. Well, exactly. No creaks from that BB. Working perfectly. Probably doing about 300, 350 at the moment. Not now, it's just flattened off a bit. Oh, prey. Hey, that occasional clack is my Dura Ace pedal. It's got play in the binding. That's going to get warranted soon. Chain reaction cycles incoming. But bottom bracket wise, first test, absolutely silent. This is a 10-minute or so climb, average is about 11%. So doing it one hand is nasty. Anyway, I'll park up in a minute and just look over the bike. Sad, last ride and it feels great. So hi everyone, welcome back to the channel, and I've come out to do the final ride before I sell it on the Supersix High Mod disc. The guy's got a great deal, but it's not exactly a seller's market for a 60cm frame where I live, so it has to go, unfortunately. Had I built it up to this standard the first time round, I might not be even selling it, because now it just feels like a brand new bike. The brakes work beautifully, the hoses are the right length, the cables are the right length, all the outers are the right length. I took real care doing that. I've set the front mech up better than it ever was before, and yeah, I'm actually really gutted to see it go, because it's a great fun stiff bike, and yeah, it is a pretty sad last ride. But I've already done a review of this bike in terms of scores, but what do I think kind of subjectively? I'll put the scores up, the little scoring matrix that I do with all the other bikes in a minute against the TCR that I'm riding. But the first thing I can say is this is noticeably stiffer in plane and out of plane. So out of plane would be pedaling stiffness, cornering stiffness, that type of thing. It could be the high modulus fibres, it could be due to the slightly larger down tube and head tube diameters that Cannondale are using. But I noticed the lack of comfort more on this bike as well. There's very little exposed seat post, where on the TCR you've got the long exposed ISP. Even though that ISP is very stiff with the high modulus fibres and it's quite deep, there's a lot more exposed length, and deflection goes up with length cubed, and this doesn't really have a lot of exposed seat post, so there's not much deflection going to happen. And I do notice on this bike over rough roads it isn't as comfortable as basically any other bike I've ridden. This is one of the most harsh bikes, stiffest bikes and raciest feeling bikes, because it really kicks you in the back end if you've got rough roads. If you can deal with that, it's a winner. Apart from that, it's actually very similar to the TCR in terms of ride feel. The geometry, the trail figures on the steering make it an agile bike to ride. It's got short chain stays, that makes it an agile bike to ride. It means the back wheel's tucked under you, has very little reluctance to tip into corners. That is also down to the trail figure on the fork. Forks with a long trail figure tend to be more stable, more reluctant to turn in, but they're more stable if you take your hands off your bars. You know, I'm selling it, but I feel sad selling it because every time I get on it, it does make me smile. It's not the most comfortable, but there we go. And I've fixed the foibles with the bottom bracket and the headset. What are the changes I've made on this bike now I'm selling it, and I probably should have done before, is the Shimano crank. That works really well. I've put a compact on it. I didn't have a compact on it before. That makes going up hills a bit easier, although going up there, just now I was in 34/28, I was in the bottom gear. The other thing I've done, which I probably will do this on my TCR, is I've put 140mm disc rotors on this, and since I've had discs, I've always used 160s front and rear. I had 160s on this, which is basically my first disc bike that I built, and because the frame is actually, like I said, in plane very stiff, even the fork, fore and aft, is very stiff, and I thought the 160s felt a bit wooden. They were very easy to lock up in the wet, and it might be a feel thing, but feel is everything when it comes to braking, and these 140s, they're noticeably less powerful. They've got a lower braking torque because it's a smaller clamping diameter, but with the stiff front end of the bike, it makes modulating the braking force that little bit easier. And I probably think for a stiff bike, 160s could be overkill actually, so I might try 140s when the next ones wear out on the TCR, because that's quite stiff, but that has a bit more deflection in the front fork when you're braking. It's a bit more compliant in the front fork. As I mentioned in the review of that bike, it aids the modulation. If you've got deflection in the fork and a bit of torsional deflection in the front wheel, if the wheel is laced that way, it really helps modulation and braking traction. If you've got a very stiff front end with no compliance, if it's wet and you're going downhill, it's very easy to lock up the front brake because you put very high dynamic Gs, dynamic accelerations into, or dynamic forces into the wheel basically, and you're asking the tyre to do more work in a shorter period of time if you have less deflection. You can't argue with that as physics. Yeah, and that's it. Everything's working well. Oh, it's got a manual focus. You're joking. Geometry wise, I measured it earlier next to the TCR from centre of the seat post clamp to middle of the stem. They've both got the same stem length, both 120 stems. And this is actually 5mm shorter than the TCR in terms of pure fit. It's got a slightly shorter top tube and a tickle steeper seat tube, which I actually like. Stack wise, they're about exactly the same, although this is running kind of 10mm less spacers to achieve the same stack. So geometry, they're really similar. Slightly steeper seat tube angle on the Supersix versus the TCR. I'm not quite sure about the rest of the range and sizes, how that works. Like I mentioned in the last video, through axles don't always equal greater stiffness. And when people say, oh, through axles are stiffer, ask them what they actually mean. Please, and report back to me and tell me what they mean when the cycling media says through axles are stiffer. Because for the same fastening torque, you're getting more axial load on an M5 than you are on an M12. And I don't care if you want to argue with that. If you're talking pure axial load on threads, if you put 5 Newton meters on an M5, which is a normal skewer, or 5 Newton meters on an M12, which is a normal through axle, I'm sorry to say the M5 has a high tensile load in it. To talk about rear end stiffness with through axles, basically you need to look at the whole rear triangle and the rear wheel system. The axle doesn't really do much. It's basically in pure tension. It's clamping. There's not much bending moment on it. And I don't really buy the whole through axle is stiffer thing. Weight wise, how do they compare? Well, the TCR SL just about edges this one on exactly the same build with the same wheels, same group set, by about 200 grams. But they're both super light bikes, considering they're 60 centimeters. The TCR SL is about 7.6 with 65 and 55mm deep rims, and this is about 7.8. But this does have the quite considerable Thompson Elite aluminium seat post, which, as I've shown in other videos, is a serious hunk of metal. With a carbon seat post, be a lot lighter. John boy. Oh God, I'm starting to sound like fucking cycling media now, aren't I? I'm getting all emotional. In a minute, I'm going to show you what I mean by out of plane stiffness. We're going to get up 25% gradient, and I'm going to have to get out of the saddle, and the camera will be at the side of the road. Right, here's the start of the local wall. I'm going to go up there, put the camera down. Luckily the cars can't get in. But you just love that noise of GP4000s ripping against rough asphalt up a steep hill. It's intoxicating. Anyway, give us a like and subscribe if you like this type of thing. If you've got a bike you want to send me, and I'll review it. I won't be too harsh, promise. I love doing these kind of reviews. Great to be back outside. The back's not playing up too much, but I don't want to do too many hills like this. Right, I'm going to go home now. It's getting dark. Cheers, see you in the next one.